After Jacob came back to the land of Canaan with his 11 sons, another son was born to him, the second child of his wife Rachel, whom Jacob loved so well. But soon after the baby came, his mother Rachel died, and Jacob was filled with sorrow. Even to this day you can see the place where Rachel was buried, on the road between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Jacob named the child whom Rachel left Benjamin, and now Jacob had 12 sons. Most of them were grown-up men, but Joseph was a boy of 17 years old, and his brother Benjamin was almost a baby. Of all his children, Jacob loved Joseph the best, because he was Rachel's child, because he was so much younger than most of his brothers, and because he was good and faithful and thoughtful. Jacob gave to Joseph a robe or coat of bright colors, made somewhat like a long cloak with wide sleeves. This was a special mark of Jacob's favor to Joseph, and it made his older brothers envious of him. Then, too, Joseph did what was right, while his older brothers often did very wrong acts, of which Joseph sometimes told their father, and this made them very angry at Joseph. But they hated him still more because of 2 strange dreams he had, and of which he told them. He said one day, "Listen to this dream that I have dreamed. I dreamed that we were out in the field binding sheaves, when suddenly my sheaf stood up, and all of your sheaves came around it and bowed down to my sheaf." And they said scornfully, "Do you suppose that the dream means that you will sometime rule over us, and that we shall bow down to you?" Then a few days after, Joseph said, "I have dreamed again. This time I saw in my dream the sun and the moon and the 11 stars all come and bow to me." And his father said to him, "I do not like you to dream such dreams. Shall I and your mother and your brothers come and bow down before you as if you were a king?" His brothers hated Joseph and would not speak kindly to him, but his father thought much of what Joseph had said. At one time, Joseph's 10 brothers were taking care of the flock in the fields near Shechem, which was nearly 50 miles from Hebron, where Jacob's tents were spread. And Jacob wished to send a message to his sons, and he called Joseph and said to him, "Your brothers are near Shechem with the flock. I wish that you would go to them and take a message, and find if they are well and if the flocks are doing well, and bring me word from them." That was quite an errand, for a boy to go alone all over the country and find his way for 50 miles and then to walk home again. But Joseph was a boy who could take care of himself and could be trusted. So he went forth on his journey, walking northward over the mountains, past Bethlehem and Jerusalem and Bethel, though we are not sure those cities were then built, except Jerusalem, which was already a strong city. When Joseph reached Shechem, he could not find his brothers, for they had taken their flocks to another place. A man met Joseph wandering in the field and asked him, "Whom are you seeking?" Joseph said, "I am looking for my brothers, the sons of Jacob. Can you tell me where I will find them?" And the man said, "They are at Dothan, for I heard them say that they were going there." Then Joseph walked over the hills to Dothan, which was 15 miles further, and his brothers saw him afar off coming toward them. They knew him by his bright garment, and one said to another, "Look, that dreamer is coming. Come, let us kill him, and throw his body into a pit, and tell his father that some wild beast has eaten him, and then we will see what becomes of his dreams." One of his brothers, whose name was Reuben, felt more kindly toward Joseph than the others. He said, "Let us not kill him, but let us throw him into this pit in the wilderness, and leave him there to die." But Reuben intended, after they had gone away, to lift Joseph out of the pit and take him home to his father. The brothers did as Reuben told them. They threw Joseph into the pit, which was empty. He cried and begged them to save him, but they would not. They calmly sat down to eat their dinner on the grass, while their brother was calling to them from the pit. After the dinner, Reuben chanced to go to another part of the field, so that he was not at hand when a company of men passed by with their camels, going to Gilead on the east of the river Jordan to Egypt, to sell spices and fragrant gum from the trees to the Egyptians. Then Judah, another of Joseph's brothers, said, "What good will it do us to kill our brother? Would it not be better for us to sell him to these men and let them carry him away? After all, he is our brother, and we would better not kill him." His brothers agreed with him, so they stopped the men who were passing, and drew up Joseph from the pit, And for 20 pieces of silver they sold Joseph to these men, and they took him away with them down to Egypt. After a while Reuben came to the pit where they had left Joseph and looked into it, but Joseph was not there. Then Reuben was in great trouble, and he came back to his brothers, saying, "The boy is not there. What shall I do?" Then his brothers told Reuben what they had done, and they all agreed to deceive their father. They killed one of the goats and dipped Joseph's coat in its blood, and they brought it to their father, and they said to him, "We found this coat out in the wilderness. Look at it, father, and tell us if you think it was the coat of your son." And Jacob knew it at once. He said, "It is my son's coat. Some wild beast has eaten him. There is no doubt that Joseph has been torn in pieces." And Jacob's heart was broken over the loss of Joseph, all the more because he had sent Joseph alone on the journey through the wilderness. They tried to comfort him, but he would not be comforted. He said, "I will go down to the grave, mourning for my poor lost son." So the old man sorrowed for his son Joseph, and all the time his wicked brothers knew that Joseph was not dead, but they would not tell their father the dreadful deed that they had done to their brother in selling him as a slave. The men who bought Joseph from his brothers were called Ishmaelites because they belonged to the family of Ishmael, who, you remember, was the son of Hagar, the servant of Sarah. These men carried Joseph southward over the plain which lies beside the great sea on the west of Canaan, and after many days they brought Joseph to Egypt. How strange it must seem to the boy who had lived in tents to see the great river Nile, and the cities thronged with people, and the temples and the mighty pyramids! The Ishmaelites sold Joseph as a slave to a man named Potiphar, who was an officer in the army of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Joseph was a beautiful boy, and cheerful and willing in his spirit, and able in all that he undertook, so that his master Potiphar became very friendly to him, and after a time he placed Joseph in charge of his house and everything in it. For some years Joseph continued in the house of Potiphar, a slave in name, but in reality the master of all his affairs, and ruler over his fellow servants. But Potiphar's wife, who at first was very friendly to Joseph, afterward became his enemy, because Joseph would not do wrong to please her. She told her husband falsely that Joseph had done a wicked deed. Her husband believed her and was very angry at Joseph, and put him in the prison with those who had been sent to the place for breaking the laws of the land. How hard it was for Joseph to be charged with a crime when he had done no wrong, and to be thrust into a dark prison among wicked people. But Joseph had faith in God, that at some time all would come out right, and in the prison he was cheerful and kind and helpful, as he had always been. The keeper of the prison saw that Joseph was not like the other men around him, and he was kind to Joseph. In a very little while Joseph was placed in charge of all of his fellow prisoners, and took care of them just as he had taken care of everything in Potiphar's house. The keeper of the prison scarcely looked into the prison at all, for he had confidence in Joseph that he would be faithful and wise in doing the work given to him. Joseph did right and served God, and God blessed Joseph in everything. While Joseph was in the prison, 2 men were sent there by the king of Egypt because he was displeased with them. One was the king's chief butler, who served the king with wine. The other was the chief baker, who served him with bread. These 2 men were under Joseph's care, and Joseph waited on them, for they were men of rank. One morning, when Joseph came into the room where the butler and the baker were kept, he found them looking quite sad. Joseph said to them, "Why do you look so sad today?" Joseph was cheerful and happy in his spirit, and he wished others to be happy also, even in prison. And one of them said, "Each one of us dreamed last night a very strange dream, and there is no one to tell us what our dreams mean." For in those times, before God gave the Bible to men, he often spoke to men in dreams, and there were wise men who could sometimes tell what the dreams meant. "Tell me," said Joseph, "what your dreams are. Perhaps my God will help me to understand them." Then the chief butler told his dream. He said, "In my dream I saw a grapevine with 3 branches. And as I looked, the branches shot out buds, and the buds became blossoms, and the blossoms turned into clusters of ripe grapes. And I picked the grapes and squeezed their juice into King Pharaoh's cup, and it became wine. And I gave it to King Pharaoh to drink, just as I used to do when I was beside his table." Then Joseph said, This is what your dream means. The 3 branches mean 3 days. In 3 days King Pharaoh shall call you out of prison, and shall put you back in your place, and you shall stand at his table, and shall give him his wine, as you have given it before. But when you go out of prison, please to remember me, and try to find some way to get me, too, out of this prison. For I was stolen out of the land of Canaan, and sold as a slave, and I have done nothing wrong to deserve being put in this prison. Do speak to the king for me, that I may be set free." Of course the chief butler felt very happy to hear that his dream had so pleasant a meaning, and the chief baker spoke, hoping to have an answer as good. "In my dream," said the baker, "there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head, one above another, and on the topmost basket were all kinds of roasted meat and food for Pharaoh, and the birds came and ate the food from the baskets on my head." And Joseph said to the baker, "This is the meaning of your dream, and I am sorry to tell it to you. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, by order of the king, you shall be lifted up and hanged upon a tree, and the birds shall eat your flesh from your bones as you are hanging in the air." And it came to pass just as Joseph had said. 3 days after that, King Pharaoh sent his officers to the prison. They came and took out both the chief butler and the chief baker. The baker they hung up by his neck to die, and left his body for the birds to pick in pieces. The chief butler they brought back to his old place, where he waited at the king's table, and handed him his wine to drink. You would have supposed that the butler would remember Joseph, who had given him the promise of freedom and had shown such wisdom. But in his gladness he forgot all about Joseph, and 2 full years passed by while Joseph was still in prison, until he was a man 30 years old. But one night King Pharaoh himself dreamed a dream, in fact 2 dreams in one. And in the morning he sent for all the wise men of Egypt and told to them his dreams. But there was not a man who could give the meaning of them. And the king was troubled, for he felt that the dreams had some meaning which it was important for him to know. Then suddenly the chief butler, who was by the king's table, remembered his own dream in the prison 2 years before, and remembered, too, the young man who had told its meaning so exactly. And he said, "I do remember my faults this day. 2 years ago King Pharaoh was angry with his servants, with me and the chief baker, and he sent us to the prison. While we were in the prison, one night each of us dreamed a dream, and the next day a young man in the prison, a Hebrew from the land of Canaan, told us what our dreams meant. And in 3 days they came true, just as the young Hebrew had said. I think that if this young man is in the prison still, he could tell the king the meaning of his dreams." You notice that the butler spoke of Joseph as a Hebrew. The people of Israel, to whom Joseph belonged, were called Hebrews as well as Israelites. The word Hebrew means one who crossed over, and it was given to the Israelites because Abraham, their father, had come from a land on the other side of the great river Euphrates, and had crossed over the river on his way to Canaan. Then King Pharaoh sent in haste to the prison for Joseph, and Joseph was taken out, and he was dressed in new garments, and was led in to Pharaoh in the palace. And Pharaoh said, "I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one who can tell what it means. And I have been told that you have power to understand dreams and what they mean." And Joseph answered Pharaoh, "The power is not in me, but God will give Pharaoh a good answer. What is the dream that the king has dreamed?" "In my first dream," said Pharaoh, "I was standing by the river, and I saw 7 fat and handsome cows come up from the river to feed in the grass. And while they were feeding, 7 other cows followed them up from the river, very thin and poor and lean, such miserable creatures as I have never seen before. And the 7 lean cows ate up the 7 fat cows. And after they had eaten them up, they were as lean and miserable as before. Then I awoke, and I fell asleep again and dreamed again. In my second dream, I saw 7 heads of grain growing up on one stalk, large and strong and good. And then 7 heads came up after them that were thin and poor and withered. And the 7 thin heads swallowed up the 7 good heads, and afterward were as poor and withered as before. And I told these 2 dreams to all the wise men, and there is no one who can explain them. Can you tell me what these dreams mean?" And Joseph said to the king, "The 2 dreams have the same meaning. God has been showing to King Pharaoh what he will do in this land. The 7 good cows mean 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain mean the same 7 years. The 7 lean cows and the 7 thin heads of grain also mean 7 years. The good cows and the good grain mean 7 years of plenty, and the 7 thin cows and thin heads of grain mean 7 poor years. There are coming upon the land of Egypt 7 years of such plenty as have never been seen, when the fields shall bring greater crops than ever before, and after those years shall come 7 years when the fields shall bring no crops at all, and then, for 7 years, there shall be such need that the years of plenty will be forgotten, for the people will have nothing to eat. Now, let King Pharaoh find some man who is able and wise, and let him set this man to rule over the land. And during the 7 years of plenty, let a part of the crops be put away for the years of need. If this shall be done, then when the years of need come, there will be plenty of food for all the people, and no one will suffer, for all will have enough. And King Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has shown you all this, there is no other man as wise as you. I will appoint you to do this work, and to rule over the land of Egypt. All the people shall be under you. Only on the throne of Egypt I will be above you. And Pharaoh took from his own hand the ring which held his seal, and put on Joseph's hand, so that he could sign for the king, and seal in the king's place. And he dressed Joseph in robes of fine linen, and put around his neck a gold chain. And he made Joseph ride in a chariot which was next in rank to his own. And they cried out before Joseph, Bow the knee! And thus Joseph was ruler over all the land of Egypt. When Joseph was made ruler over the land of Egypt, he did just as he had always done. It was not Joseph's way to sit down, to rest and enjoy himself, and make others wait on him. He found his work at once and began to do it faithfully and thoroughly. He went out over all the land of Egypt and saw how rich and abundant were the fields of grain, giving much more than the people could use for their needs. He told the people not to waste it, but to save it for the coming time of need. And he called upon the people to give him, for the king, 1 bushel of grain out of every 5, to be stored up. The people brought their grain, after taking for themselves as much as they needed, and Joseph stored it up in great storehouses in the cities, so much at last that no one could keep account of it. The king of Egypt gave a wife to Joseph from the noble young women of his kingdom. Her name was Asenath, and to Joseph and his wife God gave 2 sons. The oldest son he named Manasseh, a word which means making to forget. For, said Joseph, God has made me to forget all my troubles and my toil as a slave. The second son he named Ephraim, a word that means fruitful, because, said Joseph, God has not only made the land fruitful, but he has made me fruitful in the land of my troubles. The 7 years of plenty soon passed by, and then came the years of need. In all the lands around people were hungry, and there was no food for them to eat. But in the land of Egypt everybody had enough. Most of the people soon used up the grain that they had saved. Many had saved none at all, and they cried to the king to help them. Go to Joseph, said King Pharaoh, and do whatever he tells you to do. Then the people came to Joseph, and Joseph opened the storehouses, and sold to the people all the grain that they wished to buy. And not only the people of Egypt came to buy grain, but people of all the lands around as well, for there was great need and famine everywhere. And the need was as great in the land of Canaan, where Jacob lived, as in other lands. Jacob was rich in flocks and cattle, and gold and silver, but his fields gave no grain, and there was danger that his family and his people would starve. And Jacob, who is now called Israel also, heard that there was food in Egypt, and he said to his sons, Why do you look at each other asking what to do to find food? I have been told that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that land and take money with you and bring grain, so that we may have bread and may live. Then the 10 older brothers of Joseph went down to the land of Egypt. They rode upon asses, for horses were not much used in those times, and they brought money with them. But Jacob would not let Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, go with them, for he was all the more dear to his father now that Joseph was no longer with him, and Jacob feared that harm might come to him. Then Joseph's brothers came to Joseph to buy food. They did not know him, grown up to be a man, dressed as a prince, and seated on a throne. Joseph was now nearly 40 years old, and it had been almost 23 years since they had sold him. But Joseph knew them all as soon as he saw them. He wished to be sharp and stern with them, not because he hated them, but because he wished to see what their spirit was, and whether they were as selfish and cruel and wicked as they had been in other days. They came before him and bowed with their faces to the ground. Then, no doubt, Joseph thought of the dream that had come to him while he was a boy, of his brothers' sheaves bending down around his sheaf. He spoke to them as a stranger, as if he did not understand their language, and he had their words explained to him in the language of Egypt. "Who are you, and from what place do you come?" said Joseph in a harsh, stern manner. They answered him very meekly, "We have come from the land of Canaan to buy food." "No," said Joseph. "I know what you have come for. You have come as spies to see how helpless the land is, so that you can bring an army against us and make war on us." "No, no," said Joseph's 10 brothers. "We are no spies. We are the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan, and we have come for food because we have none at our home." "You say that you are the sons of one man. Who is your father? Is he living? Have you any more brothers? Tell me all about yourselves." And they said, "Our father is an old man in Canaan. We did have a younger brother, but he was lost. And we have one brother still, who is the youngest of all, but his father could not spare him to come with us." "No," said Joseph. "You are not good, honest men. You are spies. I shall put you all in prison, except one of you, and he shall go and bring that youngest brother of yours. And when I see him, then I will believe that you tell the truth." So Joseph put all 10 men in prison, and kept them under guard for 3 days. Then he sent for them again. They did not know that he could understand their language, and they said to each other, while Joseph heard, but pretended not to hear, "This has come upon us because of the wrong that we did to our brother Joseph more than 20 years ago. We heard him cry and plead with us when we threw him into the pit, and we would not have mercy on him. God is giving us only what we have deserved." And Reuben, who had tried to save Joseph, said, "Did I not tell you not to harm the boy, and you would not listen to me? God is bringing our brother's blood upon us all." When Joseph heard this, his heart was touched, for he saw that his brothers were really sorry for the wrong that they had done to him. He turned away from them so that they could not see his face, and he wept. Then he turned again to them and spoke roughly as before, and said, "This I will do, for I serve God. I will let you all go home except one man. One of you I will shut up in prison, but the rest of you can go home and take food for your people. And you must come back and bring your youngest brother with you, and I shall know then that you have spoken the truth." Then Joseph gave orders, and his servants seized one of his brothers, whose name was Simeon, and bound him in their sight, and took him away to prison. And he ordered his servants to fill up the men's sack with grain, and to put every man's money back into the sack before it was tied up, so that they would find the money as soon as they opened the sack. Then the men loaded their asses with the sacks of grain, and started to go home, leaving their brother Simeon a prisoner. When they stopped on the way to feed their asses, one of the brothers opened his sack, and there he found his money lying on the top of the grain. He called out to his brothers, "See, here is my money given again to me!" And they were frightened, but they did not dare to go back to Egypt and meet the stern ruler of the land. They went home and told their old father all that had happened to them, and how their brother Simeon was in prison, and must stay there until they should return, bringing Benjamin with them. When they opened their sacks of grain, there in the mouth of each sack was the money that they had given, and they were filled with fear. Then they spoke of going again to Egypt and taking Benjamin, but Jacob said to them, "You are taking my sons away from me. Joseph is gone, and Simeon is gone, and now you would take Benjamin away. All these things are against me." Reuben said, "Here are my own 2 boys. You may kill them if you wish, in case I do not bring Benjamin back to you." But Jacob said, "My youngest son shall not go with you. His brother is dead, and he alone is left to me. If harm should come to him, it would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave." The food which Jacob's sons had brought from Egypt did not last long, for Jacob's family was large. Most of his sons were married and had children of their own, so that the children and grandchildren were 66, besides the servants who waited on them and the men who cared for Jacob's flocks. So around the tent of Jacob was quite a camp of other tents and an army of people. When the food that had come from Egypt was nearly eaten up, Jacob said to his sons, "Go down to Egypt again and buy some food for us." And Judah, Jacob's son, the man who years before had urged his brothers to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, said to his father, "It is of no use for us to go to Egypt unless we take Benjamin with us. The man who rules in that land said to us, 'You shall not see my face unless your youngest brother be with you.'" And Israel said, "Why did you tell the man that you had a brother? You did me great harm when you told him." "Why," said Jacob's sons, "we could not help telling him. The man asked us all about our family. 'Is your father yet living? Have you any more brothers?' And we had to tell him, his questions were so close. How should we know that he would say, 'Bring your brother here for me to see him'?" And Judah said, "Send Benjamin with me, and I will take care of him. I promise you that I will bring him safely home. If he does not come back, let me bear the blame forever. He must go, or we shall die for want of food, and we might have gone down to Egypt and come home again if we had not been kept back." And Jacob said, "If he must go, then he must. But take a present to the man, some of the choicest fruits of the land, some spices and perfumes, and nuts and almonds, and take twice as much money, besides the money that was in your sacks. Perhaps that was a mistake when the money was given back to you. And take your brother Benjamin, and may the Lord God make the man kind to you, so that he will set Simeon free, and let you bring Benjamin back. But if it is God's will that I lose my children, I cannot help it." So 10 brothers of Joseph went down a second time to Egypt, Benjamin going in place of Simeon. They came to Joseph's office, the place where he sold grain to the people, and they stood before their brother and bowed as before. Joseph saw that Benjamin was with them, and he said to his steward, the man who was over his house, "Make ready a dinner, for all these men shall dine with me today." When Joseph's brothers found that they were taken into Joseph's house, they were filled with fear. They said to each other, "We have been taken here on account of the money in our sacks. They will say that we have stolen it, and then they will sell us all for slaves." But Joseph's steward, the man who was over his house, treated the men kindly. And when they spoke of the money in their sacks, he would not take it again, saying, "Never fear. Your God must have sent you this as a gift. I had your money." The stewards received the men into Joseph's house and washed their feet according to the custom of the land. And at noon Joseph came in to meet them. They brought him the present from their father, and again they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. And Joseph asked them if they were well, and said, "Is your father still living, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he well?" And they said, "Our father is well, and he is living." And again they bowed to Joseph. And Joseph looked at his youngest brother Benjamin, the child of his own mother Rachel, and said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious unto you, my son." And Joseph's heart was so full that he could not keep back the tears. He went in haste to his own room and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out again, and ordered the table to be set for dinner. They set Joseph's table for himself as the ruler, and another table for his Egyptian officers, and another for the 11 men from Canaan. For Joseph had brought Simeon out of the prison and had given him a place with his brothers. Joseph himself arranged the order of the seats for his brothers, the oldest at the head, and all in order of age down to the youngest. The men wondered at this, and could not see how the ruler of Egypt could know the order of their ages. And Joseph sent dishes from his table to his brothers, and he gave to Benjamin 5 times as much as to the others. Perhaps he wished to see whether they were as jealous of Benjamin as in other days they had been toward him. After dinner Joseph said to his steward, "Fill the men's sacks with grains, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in his sack. and put my silver cup in the sack of the youngest, with his money." The steward did as Joseph had said, and early in the morning the brothers started to go home. A little while afterward Joseph said to his steward, "Hasten, follow after the men from Canaan, and say, 'Why have you wronged me after I had treated you kindly? You have stolen my master's silver cup, out of which he drinks.'" The steward followed the men and overtook them and charged them with stealing. And they said to him, "Why should you talk to us in this manner? We have stolen nothing. Why, we brought back to you the money that we found in our sacks. And is it likely that we would steal from your lord his silver or gold? You may search us, and if you find your master's cup on any of us, let him die, and the rest of us may be sold as slaves." Then they took down the sacks from the asses and opened them, and in each man's sack was his money for the second time. And when they came to Benjamin's sack, there was the ruler's silver cup. Then, in greatest sorrow, they tied up their bags again and laid them on the asses and came back to Joseph's palace. And Joseph said to them, "What wicked thing is this that you have done? Did you not know that I would surely find out your deeds?" Then Judah said, "Oh, my lord, what can we say? God has punished us for our sins, and now we must all be slaves, both we that are older and the younger in whose sack the cup was found." "No," said Joseph. "Only one of you is guilty, the one who has taken away my cup. I will hold him as a slave, and the rest of you can go home to your father." Joseph wished to see whether his brothers were still selfish and were willing to let Benjamin suffer if they could escape. Then Judah, the very man who had urged his brothers to sell Joseph as a slave, came forward and fell at Joseph's feet and pleaded with him to let Benjamin go. He told again the whole story, how Benjamin was the one whom his father loved the most of all of his children now that his brother was lost. He said, "I promised to bear the blame if this boy was not brought home in safety. If he does not go back, it will kill my poor old father who has seen much trouble. Now, let my youngest brother go home to his father, and I will stay here as a slave in his place." Joseph knew now what he had longed to know, that his brothers were no longer cruel and selfish, but one of them was willing to suffer so that his brother might be spared. And Joseph could no longer keep his secret, for his heart longed after his brothers, and he was ready to weep again with tears of love and joy. He sent all of his Egyptian servants out of the room so that he might be alone with his brothers, and then he said, "Come near to me, I wish to speak with you." And they came near, wondering. Then Joseph said, "I am Joseph. Is my father really alive?" How frightened his brothers were as they heard these words spoken in their own language by the ruler of Egypt, and for the first time knew that this stern man who had their lives in his hand was their own brother whom they had wronged. Then Joseph said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But do not feel troubled because of what you did, for God sent me before you to save your lives. There have been already 2 years of need and famine, and there are to be 5 years more, when there shall neither be plowing of the fields nor harvest. It was not you who sent me here, but God, and He sent me here to save your lives. God has made me like a father to Pharaoh and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Now I wish you to go home and to bring down to me my father and all his family." Then Joseph placed his arms around Benjamin's neck and kissed him and wept upon him. And Benjamin wept on his neck. And Joseph kissed all of his brothers to show them that he had fully forgiven them. And after that his brothers began to lose their fear of Joseph and talked with him more freely. Afterward Joseph sent his brothers home with good news and rich gifts and abundant food. He sent also wagons in which Jacob and his sons' wives and their little ones of the family might ride from Canaan down to Egypt. And Joseph's brothers went home happier than they had been for many years.